Was that your first ever time seeing Ronin?
Yeah.
What did you think?
Well, I mean, I had heard so much about Ronin going into it because it often gets referenced as an example of a really, really good car chase.
Yeah, that's what it's known for.
You know, it often makes like lists and things, or people will bring it up in video essays on YouTube,
right?
Things like that. So all I really knew about it was that it was some sort of like heist movie with Robert De Niro, Jean Reno, and it had this great car chase in it. And I'd seen a few clips of the car chase, and it did look pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. And then they added it to Netflix a couple weeks ago, and I was like, sure. Okay, I'll watch it. I actually liked it quite a bit. Like, there are definitely huge sections of it that are very silly
and don't make any sense at all.
Yeah, especially like
the plot.
well, I mean, the plot is, it ends up being like one of the biggest MacGuffins ever, where they're chasing this case that you don't know what's in it. And you just know that there are Russian mobsters after it and IRA guys after it. And there's basically like no police presence in the movie. Like these guys are able to like tear around France, killing all sorts of innocent bystanders. Yeah,
that's the funniest part. Yeah,
and like literally, like they shoot up a bunch of people in a market when they pull off the initial heist of the case, and then they're like killing random people at like an ancient Roman ruin in Arles. And then there's like other random collateral damage later on. It really gets a little bit out of hand, especially with like stuff in the news about actual terrorist attacks and things happening in France. It feels a little bit just too separated from reality. Like your suspension of disbelief becomes a little bit more difficult. I was like, okay, come on. Are we really supposed to expect that Bobby De Niro and Jean Reno could evade everybody while all this was happening?
If you ever pay attention to De Niro when he's driving around in the car chase, especially through the tunnels, he looks terrified.
Yeah.
It's really funny. It looks like he's sitting in the passenger seat and the stunt car driver is freaking him out.
Yes.
In the entire time, he's like sitting way back in his seat and he's got this look of fear, or he's perplexed almost. But it's true about the car chases, though, that like they're really well done, especially considering like the era that they were filmed in. I think it was early 90s, actually, right? Like it's impressive. Even if you watch it today, it actually looks a lot better than some of the car chases today because there's not a lot of fancy jump cuts. They actually drive the cars through these like crazy angles and scenarios where it really feels like they're in danger. And I think that's where Robert De Niro's face comes from. He looks kind of constipated, but it's more like fear. The other thing is too, the title doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like other than some like small little intermission where they hide out in this house with this guy that's fascinated and obsessed with this little like samurai.
Yeah, that French actor who was in Moonraker. He was the Bond villain in Moonraker.
Yeah. So he has this like little setup that's depicting like, I think, a war scene.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to explain, I don't think fully correctly, what Ronin actually is.
Yes.
And somehow that's just the movie's name, because I think partly because he thought it sounded cool.
Yeah, it is a bit. And it's the accumulation of all these little weird kind of gaps in logic that does make me sort of, the more I think about the movie, the more I want to change my Letterboxd rating down.
Because definitely the first time you see it, you're too much in all of the car action and the sequences.
Yes.
And some of the characters are actually legitimately interesting because we know so little about them. But the more you think about it, the more you're just like, this is a guy who had a ton of like disparate scenes and tried to edit it into one movie. And somehow he pulled it off. This cold opening is going on for a while, but I think it's become like a trademark now. But on a tangent, have you seen 47 Ronin, the one with Keanu Reeves?
Isn't that like a kind of fantasy sword and sorcery type of thing with like the witch character who turns into a giant snake?
Yeah, so it mixes a bit of like Japanese mythology into that fable, that story. I think the veracity or the historical accuracy of that story about the 47 Ronin, I think is kind of disputed. I think it's become like a folktale now almost.
Oh, okay.
But the one with Keanu Reeves it's not a good movie. But it's interesting how they tie all these like different elements in together.
Right.
And if you're into like fantasy and action and Keanu Reeves' wooden acting, I think it's the perfect movie for you. I think we should get started, though.
Yeah, I think we should get started. Another long cold open. That's opening segment.
That's okay. We went from Ronin to Keanu Reeves, so that's pretty good.
Yeah. So yeah, come on back after the intro, and we'll get into some more stuff.
Welcome to the 86th episode of the Extra Buttery podcast, the free-flowing conversation between two guys who love film and TV. This week, we discuss our thoughts on Queen and Slim, a romantic drama masquerading as a crime film, and we rehash chapters 10 and 11 of The Mandalorian and the newest season of The Crown. So, Rob, how are you?
Doing pretty good. This is another tangent, but hey, that's the theme. Went to get measured for a new tweed jacket yesterday, so that felt like a fun thing.
Oh.
A little birthday gift to myself. So
happy birthday. When is your birthday?
It's November the 8th.
Oh, well, happy belated birthday.
Well, thank you very much.
I feel terrible for not knowing your birthday. Do you know my birthday?
No, I don't.
Okay, fair. But anyway, let's go back to this tweed jacket. So the implication is you have more than one.
No, this is my first tweed jacket.
Oh, okay.
I have always wanted one, and I had this idea in my head that I like the look of tweed, but a lot of the tweed jackets that I've seen other dudes wear they're kind of like the boxy sort of professor type look.
Right.
I wanted one that had that kind of material, but was a better kind of like tailored fit. So went into the place where I get my dress shirts made. It's a favorite of mine for the past few years. And they also do suits, and got my measurements taken. We kind of looked over some fabrics, picked it all out. So that'll be ready for me in the next month or two. So looking forward to that.
So where you wear it next time we talk, when it's ready?
When it's ready, yeah. I'll be modeling it I've talked about it on a few Zoom calls and things with folks now that I've kind of set up an expectation with a few people. I'll have to be doing some modeling once it's done. You can always put on fancy clothes for a Zoom call, but you end up being the only guy in the meeting who's decided to dress up. So it's a bit of an awkward situation.
Speaking of awkward situation, our film Queen and Slim features two characters who are put in a very, very awkward situation.
Ooh, nice segue. Yeah, well, awkward is one way to put it. This is a film from Melina Matsoukas, who it's her first time feature, but she's been a director for ages. I've been going through her IMDb since I watched this movie, and she's been a director for a lot of Beyonce's music videos, as well as Rihanna.
Yeah,
that's kind of she's been in the music video world for a long time. But in this first feature that it came out last year, 2019, kind of a small release, she casts Daniel Kaluuya and what's his co-star's name?
Jodie Turner-Smith.
Jodie Turner-Smith as a couple who are going on a first date. It's like the middle of the winter in Ohio. Queen is a new lawyer. She's kind of coming up in the legal world. Slim goes to drive Queen home, but then they get pulled over by a cop.
I thought we were gonna hang out, maybe get to know each other.
Failed to execute a turn signal back there.
I'll go ahead and ask you to step out of the vehicle for me.
Could you please hurry up?
What did you say?
It's just cold.
Get on the ground! Keep your hands where I can see them!
Why is he under arrest?
Get back
What
in
is
the
your
car.
badge number?
Chill, just chill!
I'm reaching for my cell phone!
A very familiar to us, to the audience, situation plays out where what's supposed to be a very kind of basic type of encounter where the cop is just pulling Slim over for having for not indicating when he turned a corner, and it builds up into this confrontation. The cop pulls his gun. There's a scuffle, and the cop shoots at Queen, hits her in the leg, drops the gun. Slim picks it up and kills the cop in self-defense. So this sets off this kind of cross-state road trip of sorts where they're trying to run away from the FBI. They really don't know what to do next. They're not career criminals. They're pretty average people, but they start building up this kind of national following around them. People are following their case and trying to help them along their way as they try to stay one step ahead of the authorities. Their relationship didn't seem like it had much of a future in the date that opens up the movie, by the end of it, they've basically like ride or die.
Yeah, so this is why I called it in the intro a romantic drama masquerading as a crime drama, because at the heart of this story is this love story about Queen and Slim, who are very, very different people. And through this sort of external, once in a lifetime happenstance, they end up growing close to each other out of necessity and then falling in love with one another. If you didn't have like, you know, the cross state line police chase, the whole murder thing, this would have been like a Prince and the Pauper type of story.
Yep.
About two people from opposite sides of the track who hate each other and then end up together at the end.
Yep.
So the director you talked about, she's really known for her music videos. And the music in this is actually quite incredible, I think.
Yeah, it's this amazing soundtrack.
Yeah, a lot of the choices are kind of interesting because it's kind of idiosyncratic. So it's like this slow burn crime drama sometimes, but you have like mainstream hip hop blaring in the background the entire time.
Yep.
So it creates this sort of nice juxtaposition. The guy who did the soundtrack, his name is Devontae Hines. He's actually like an up and comer now. He's got a couple projects coming up that are actually very interesting. And I think the music adds such a nice layer to this film. The one thing about this film is that it has obviously a lot of political commentary, and I get that. The one trap that it kind of falls into is that we're introduced to Queen, who is a lawyer, and we're led to believe comes from a fairly affluent family, so that she had all these opportunities open to her. But we learn later on that she comes from a pretty, you know, not destitute, but a pretty rough background. And so the movie, I think it kind of faults itself when her background defaults into like sort of the quote unquote black stereotypical ghetto family that we see a lot in films. It seems like every black character, no matter where they are in the social economic strata, always knows like a drug dealer or a pimp or a family member who like deals drugs or is part of the crime syndicate or something like that.
Yeah.
That's where I felt like it kind of lost me a little bit, but that's a minor nitpick. I think overall this is quite a moving and well done film.
It falls to like Daniel Kaluuya, who we learn is he comes from a pretty religious background and not quite wealthy, but definitely upper middle class. His parents live in a nice house and he doesn't drink. He doesn't like misbehave or anything like that. So he becomes a little bit more of the innocent in this kind of thing, where even though he was the one to fire the shot that kills the cop, he's the one who ends up kind of being quote unquote corrupted a little bit by the experience, more so than Queen does, because she's familiar with all of this kind of criminal background stuff, even though she made a deliberate attempt to raise herself out of that. So yeah, there's the dynamic there is a bit of an unconventional one. And you're totally right. Like there are definitely some stereotypes mixed in there but I think they're not bad stereotypes. I think they're in there for a very deliberate reason. The screenplay is actually by Lena Waithe, who people will remember from the Aziz Ansari series Master of None.
Right.
So Lena Waithe came up on that show to an extent. She played Aziz Ansari's one of his best friends. And she actually wrote an episode about that, about her character on the show coming out to her family during Thanksgiving, which ended up winning her an Emmy back in I think it was 2018. It's quite a good episode of TV, like considering the fact that it's supposed to be a show centered around Ansari's character and the fact that he kind of gave this whole episode over to her to write and star in as kind of like a tangent from the typical show. It definitely proves that Lena Waithe she has a story to tell. She's got writing in her to share with people. And this feature collaboration with Matsoukas backs that up for sure.
I think the idea is that there aren't too many caricatures in this movie, although in the film they are compared to Bonnie and Clyde, and it sort of has this romantic sort of aura around a runaway couple who are also killers. The only caricature I can think of is maybe the cop at the beginning.
Yeah.
And with the one that pulls them over and ends up getting shot, he seems most like the caricature because he plays like a racist white cop. Like there's no other way to really describe him.
I was thinking like, does his motivation make sense essentially? Like,
yeah, me too. I was wondering that. Yeah.
Did they structure that encounter in a way that's actually plausible because it escalates so quickly?
They also do some dumb things, which the movie points out too from other black characters, right? Like they criticize Queen for mouthing off and basically setting off the police officer and him pulling his gun.
Yeah.
It almost lost me in the first half hour because I thought, oh man, this is another stupid movie about stupid characters doing stupid things and having like an implausible series of events where they like successfully run from Ohio to Cuba and like flee the police and live this crazy fantasy land life in where the authorities can't get them.
Yeah.
And thankfully it never gets to that point. And I don't want to spoil too much because I think there's some twists and turns in there that are actually quite nice, but it does seem a little odd that it is like every single character in that film other than the police are anti-police.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of very convenient encounters and they encounter several times they run into situations where you think that they're for sure going to get caught. And then a character has like a change of heart or some sort of mysterious kind of like force compels them to change their mind and help Queen and Slim out. I think that's partly the intention too, because when you think about how they're working the music into the film and how there are these long scenes that feel like music videos.
Yes, very much so.
That are kind of strung together. And so I think there's like a deliberate fantasy kind of element here that the convenient things that happen to them it's not so much about the plausibility of them. It's more about like, okay, the jumping off point was something that is very, very familiar, unfortunately, to a lot of black people out there. Even more so today, like we're watching this a year after it came out and we've only seen more and more of these incidents happen. So, you know, the exact hows and whys of the setup don't really matter too much. It's more about kind of talking more generally about everything that's wrong with racism in America. And that won't work for everybody. Some people will find it preachy. Some people will find it a little bit, you know.
The other thing I want to point out, and you kind of touched on it, is that there's a lot of style in this. So there's a scene where they go to Queen's uncle's house and they have to leave all of a sudden in the middle of the night. And the first half of the movie is shot in the dark because when they shoot the cop and when they get pulled over, it's like it's very late in the night anyway.
Yep.
But the next day when they emerge from Queen's uncle's house, she's got this like, I think it's a leopard print miniskirt dress on.
Yep.
And he's got like a
rattleskin boots, I think she's got.
Yeah, rattleskin boots. And he's wearing like a suede maroon red sort of like sweatsuit piece.
Yes.
As gritty as the first part was, I think the music video sensibilities of that style of color, of like interesting visual things comes back, especially in the end where they're walking. Well, I guess I'm going to spoil it now anyway, aren't I?
All right. So if you're thinking about watching it, like go refer to the time codes in the episode description. Yeah. Jump over this. Jump to the next segment.
Yeah. Okay. So the last part where they get out of the car and they're approaching the plane that's going to take them to Cuba, and then they're walking hand in hand, and then the police come from behind, like in the background.
Yes.
With the lights and everything. That was very, very, very much like a stylistic choice. And the whole final shootout too was a very stylistic choice. And the ending scene where they have a mural of them with Queen and Slim on the car, like glued onto the side of this random church in Georgia, I think it was.
Yeah.
That's a very like pop art sort of style thing as well. So it's interesting how much of the music video sensibility creeps into the film that's supposed to be really gritty. I think this film could have been interpreted very differently in different hands.
Yes.
And sometimes it is a little difficult to juggle like what's happening with these characters and the style and the colors that are in this video. They even make a point of saying like, we can't drive around in this like bright green muscle
Pontiac,
muscle car because it draws too much attention. And well, Queen's just like, well, actually we're hiding in plain sight. So there's that part, the green car, and then they go drive through this like backcountry of southern USA that's really beautiful, full of weeds and green and water, and it looks very pretty. For whatever reason, I think there's a part of me that just can't buy into the whole thing because I always want the film to commit to one thing or other. I think it's very hard to balance the gritty part of it versus the colorful aspect of it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's okay. It does a fairly decent job of doing that.
The only other thing that occurs to me is that you could almost make the argument that, like you were saying, when they emerge from the darkness that first night, it's sort of like in a realistic movie, they would have been caught at that point.
Yeah.
And everything we see afterward, like once they transform into this kind of exaggerated version of themselves, with Queen wearing like the leopard print and Slim wearing the tracksuit, that's kind of like the exaggerated point. That's sort of like imagine they were caught. But then their story kind of reverberates around the country, and they become sort of folk heroes of a kind. Mm-hmm. That's almost like happening in kind of like a dream world kind of situation. That's not actually what happens in the movie. Like, we're led to believe that everything after that transformation is real, but it's kind of the symbolism of it kind of points at that. But yeah, like it's for listeners in Canada, it's available on Amazon Prime for you to stream whenever you want. So yeah, it's worth it, I think, to check out. A little bit on the long side, but worth it.
I think Daniel Kaluuya has, if he wants to, has created a whole career, a whole lifetime's work of playing really edgy characters who I think are on the edge and flirt with the most based, raw criminal side of our psyches. I think he does a very good job with his eyes when he stares at you. There's a couple points in there where it looks like he's going to kill someone, but he doesn't. But anyway, yeah, I agree with you. Really worth a watch. Speaking of killing, Star Wars, The Mandalorian. We learn more about this creed of killers called the Mandalores in chapters 10 and 11.
Yes.
I didn't like chapter 10 as much. So that was the one with the introduction of the frog lady and the ice spiders.
Yes.
So I thought that was more of a setup to everything. Kind of like a Creature of the Week episode without a real ending, to be honest, because it kind of cliffhangs.
Yeah, very much so.
Chapter 11, I think, gets back to its roots, especially Star Wars roots, where it's like this character goes to one place and he has to do one thing and then he moves on to the next. And it's just one mission after another. The
creature feature of episode 10 is definitely kind of a transitory sort of situation where it feels like the Mandalorian ends up fighting lots of large creatures in this show. But yeah, that one is more about kind of setting up the scenario where he finally delivers his passenger, the frog lady, to the place that she was trying to get to. And in exchange, he gets the information about how to find more of his kind, because through a series of situations, he's got to talk first to more of his kind, more Mandalorians, to find Jedi so that he can give baby Yoda to the Jedi, because he thinks that's the end point of his quest, basically. So that's one thing that kind of confused me. Wasn't he supposed to just reunite Baby Yoda to like his species and his planet, not necessarily to the Jedi? It's not like the Jedi own that species, right? No, but Yoda's species is so rare that the only others of his kind that anybody knows are Yoda and Yaddle, basically. Yaddle again. Yaddle makes another appearance. She's going to be our unofficial mascot at this rate. Yeah. And so, like, you know, people think about Les species and they think about the Jedi. So they just assume, well, hey, you know, all of these little green guys are Jedi. So it makes sense to reunite him with a Jedi regardless. And again, there's so many sort of conspiracy theories floating around in this kind of part of the Star Wars universe that nobody really knows who the Jedi are anymore. So they just see them as like mystical sorcerers. And maybe in their minds, they only picture Right. Force users. Chapter 11 was directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, and she did the episode that introduced Cara Dune in season 1.
And so far, she's done a really good job, eh?
Yeah.
I think chapter 11 and that episode with Cara Dune was one of the better episodes so far. Granted, we're only 11 episodes in. So I have high hopes. The one thing I wanted to point out is that it's starting to become a little cliched because we expect a betrayal in every single episode of some level. So when Mando is on that barge and then they're going to take a look at that sea monster or whatever it is that the pirates are hiding, they're keeping the hold. And then Baby Yoda in the little carriage in the pram comes in. And then Mando says, that's close enough. You knew exactly what was going to happen.
Yes.
And you kind of just distrust every single character in the Star Wars universe now. I feel like that gets a little tiring, though, because I think once that happens, you discount what everyone says and does because there's always some sort of ulterior motive.
Yes.
And it does get a little tiring, although this is very much like a Star Wars thing. So I don't know if that annoys you or not, or if you're tired of it, or if you haven't even noticed.
I didn't notice it too much. I mean, I agree with you. Like it's definitely a common thing in Star Wars, not just this show, but the movies to an extent. Definitely a lot of the animated series. And this one episode actually reunites us with a frequent appearance from a couple of the animated shows, and that's Katie Sackhoff's character, the Mandalorian Bo-Katan.
So she was in the cartoon. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I had at first when she appeared and revealed that she was Bo-Katan, the name kind of lit up in my head. I was like, oh yeah, I've heard that name before somewhere. And I had to do a bunch of trolling around on Wookiepedia, and it sucked up like a solid hour of my time. Which I have like a real soft spot.
Time well spent.
I have a soft spot for Wookiepedia, unfortunately, and I will read one article and just go in a complete rabbit hole. But the Bo-Katan, the Katie Sackhoff character, she has appeared in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, then again in Star Wars Rebels, which is the newer animated show that appeared on Disney XD and is now available on Disney Plus. And so she's a Mandalorian who goes back, like she's fought alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi and all of the characters from the prequel trilogy. So she's definitely well connected with. You remember last episode we were talking about how we haven't seen too many connections to the Skywalker saga. Well, now with Bo-Katan coming in, and especially with the name that she drops at the end of this episode, Ahsoka Tano. That's where we start getting that connective tissue back because.
Okay, so I was wondering about that. I was like, I wonder how she knows Ahsoka Tano.
Yeah.
Because she is the apprentice of Anakin Skywalker.
Yes.
It is interesting though, like to me anyway, the most interesting part was her mentioning that the Darksaber is actually a weapon that rightfully belongs to the Mandalores.
Yes.
Which I didn't know. Do you know any more about the Darksaber? Enlighten me with your Wookiepedia knowledge.
Oh yeah. Well, I will try to like condense my 1 hour of Wookiepedia trawling down to a minute or two here. Yeah. But so basically the Darksaber is this ancient weapon, goes back thousands of years into Star Wars history, and was the weapon created by the very first Mandalorian Jedi back when the Jedi Order accepted Mandalorians into its ranks. So he created this specific weapon. After he died, the weapon became this kind of ancestral relic of sorts and became the thing that the leader of Mandalore would wield as a symbol of their authority. And it changed hands a bunch of times, and there was all these different wars over the years, and various people claimed it. Bo-Katan herself wielded it for a period of time, and that's why she's chasing after it again, because Moff Gideon, the Giancarlo Esposito character, he claimed it at the end of one of the Imperial repressions of Mandalore. So he took it, and now Bo-Katan wants it back because she wants to reclaim the throne of Mandalore, essentially. So it's more about its symbolism rather than its capability. Like, it's a lightsaber. It can, if a person who is wielding it faces off with the Jedi, they can at least stay alive.
But it's a black lightsaber, Rob.
Yeah, it just looks cool, and it has like a cool sound effect.
And it's actually like a saber too, eh? Like, instead of like a long stick where the lightsabers are, the saber is actually in the shape of a saber, so it actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's got more of like a knife-like look.
An angle, like it's got an angled. I guess the implication is that Bo-Katan is going to return, because so far we've had these like high profile actors come in for an episode, but they never really reappear again, except for Amy Sedaris.
Yep.
Cara Dune is slated to appear in the season. I don't think we've seen her yet, have we?
No, I think she, from what I can tell in like the little thumbnail image that popped up in IMDb, she'll probably be back next episode.
Okay, so there are going to be recurring characters, which is interesting because we know that Ahsoka Tano is going to have, or at least there's been talks about having her own spin-off show, right?
Yeah.
And Boba Fett too. So that'll be really interesting. I wonder how much they use Ahsoka Tano in this show. I hope she doesn't really take over for The Mandalorian, because I think The Mandalorian is still a very interesting character, especially the fact that we learned that there have been a lot of tribes of Mandalorians and they don't always agree with this is the way.
Yes. Yeah, that was a great detail, actually. And that was totally new to this episode. That was one thing that was not an established kind of thing that the show was finally referencing. Like in the animated shows, we knew there were different clans of Mandalorians back in the history of the planet, but we didn't know specifically that this one faction was called the Watch, and that they're seen as being like more religious zealots than other factions. So,
which actually, I think, so the journey of Mando learning about this, I think to me mirrors a lot of Luke's own journey, where he totally buys into the Jedi thing, like fully right at the beginning. And then only afterwards, when he's become a master, does he really question what he's taught.
Yes.
And Mando kind of goes through this whole thing too. It's just that maybe it's part of Pedro Pascal's performance, and maybe it's just the character itself. There's a lot of mystery surrounding it. You don't ever really think of Mando as the dumb good guy,
right?
The dumb hero that has to go through like this entire journey, or has to, you know, ask really dumb questions like Luke does. I think they do a really good job of giving viewers that information and just trusting them to understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I also, going back to your point about Ahsoka Tano, they've cast Rosario Dawson in that role.
Yeah, she's a big name, right? So.
She's a big name, and Giancarlo Esposito has actually given a few quotes to media about how he definitely uses the Darksaber in this season in some sort of battle. So that suggests that if he's not fighting Mando, he's probably fighting Ahsoka Tano in a lightsaber battle of some kind.
Yeah, we better get a lightsaber battle.
Yeah, but your point is well taken in that Ahsoka Tano is such a fan favorite character, and she's appeared in at least 3 animated series now, from what I can tell, or maybe just 2. But
wasn't she like not liked when they first introduced her though?
Yeah, like the very, very early seasons of Clone Wars, she was seen as being a bit of a brat and not the
so
most.
Was Anakin, right?
Yeah,
so.
But then like as more and more episodes centered on her and the kind of decision making that she had to go through, especially when she was leading her own groups of clones and things like that, she really did grow as a character, and a lot of that also came from the performance of the voice actress Ashley Eckstein. There was a fan reaction to Rosario Dawson's casting. A lot of people wanted to see Ashley Eckstein actually get the live action role. And so there was a few people kind of a little bit angry, a bit disappointed that they went with a bigger name.
Finally, Mandalorian runs into some controversy, eh? It's not so beloved anymore.
Maybe not. Maybe this one segment of Ashley Eckstein fans, they're a little bit poisoned against it. But I think Rosario Dawson will do a fine job. I mean, like visually, she definitely she looks very similar to the design of the animated character.
Right. Yes.
So that's a bit of a help too. But as long as the show doesn't get too caught up in becoming the Ahsoka Tano kind of show and being like all about lightsaber battles all of a sudden, when it hasn't been too interested in that up to this point, then I think it'll be on an even keel. It's just it'll be cool to see how the Bo-Katan story ends up kind of continuing in the background, because we know that she's going to try to reestablish Mandalore as this power in the galaxy. But our Mandalorian, Din Djarin, he's not super interested right now in being a part of that.
He's starting to question it, though.
He's starting to question it, and Bo-Katan leaves the door open for him to come and kind of join that. But that would be, I think, the more interesting story to kind of explore his relationship with that effort to restore the planet and the different factions that would be involved in that, the politics, that kind of thing.
So I have to mine your Wookiepedia mind again.
Okay.
Because my memory about this is kind of foggy because I never really finished the entire Clone Wars animated computer series.
I haven't even watched the whole series. I've watched...
Oh, okay. It just got too much. It's too much about stuff I don't care about.
And then there was Star Wars Rebels on top of it, but they did a brand new season just this year that was exclusive to Disney Plus, and I haven't watched that one. I watched the 6 seasons before that, but not the newest one.
Okay. Tangent.
Yeah.
But related. Have you ever seen the Genndy Tartakovsky version?
Yes, I really like that one.
Okay, that one was the best. That's the one that like...
Yeah. Oh, I love the guy's style. Yeah.
All hail Tartakovsky and whatever he does. I heard his new dinosaur cartoon is great. But anyway, so from what I understand, Anakin Skywalker, did he ever become Jedi Master? Like, how did he go from Padawan to Jedi Knight to having a Padawan of his own so quickly?
I can't remember exactly how it played out in Clone Wars, but
I know he gets like elevated through the ranks because everyone thinks he's the one, right?
That's part of it. Yeah. So they partner him with Ahsoka a little bit faster than like certainly Mace Windu or Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda are comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. It's almost like there's, the fact that he's the chosen one gives him a little bit of a kick upstairs. Like he gets elevated a little bit faster than he's ready to do. And they give him this apprentice. And at first they have a kind of contentious relationship, but of course that develops over time. And then the events of Clone Wars have them fighting alongside each other, but then eventually they kind of grow apart by the end of the series. I'm not sure exactly where they take it in that final season that I mentioned.
So why is it that she never appears in episode 1, 2, 3? Well, she kind of does, like in one scene, doesn't she? But she doesn't say any word.
Everything that would happen with Ahsoka would fall between episode 2 and episode 3. Uh-huh. But then there is an event. I think it's at the end of season 6 of Clone Wars that explains why she's not in episode 3. Basically, she voluntarily leaves the Jedi Order because she's upset over the treatment, over this situation where another Jedi Padawan betrays the Jedi Order and falls to the dark side.
Because there's a scene in episode 3 when Order 66 is executed and there's like an Ahsoka Tano lookalike.
Oh, yeah.
With the lightsaber that gets shot from behind and everyone kind of assumed it was her, but it wasn't really her.
No, because
there's actually 2 of their female species who are Jedi Knights.
Yeah, and the one that you're thinking of, because Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005, they hadn't even come up with the Ahsoka Tano character when Revenge of the Sith came out. So it was a bit of a retcon situation where they were like, oh, well, okay, she's going to be in this show that falls in between these 2 movies, but then we'll come up with a reason why she's left the Jedi Order by the time episode 3 starts. She goes into hiding and they bring her, they do more episodes with her in this newest season that just hit Disney Plus, but then again, she goes into hiding. And then apparently in Star Wars Rebels, which is a show that takes place, if I'm remembering correctly, it's between episode 3 and 4.
Okay.
The characters in that, who are a bunch of new characters, they're on the run from the Empire and they meet up with Ahsoka again in hiding. She fights Vader, her former master, and there's this big confrontation, but then again, she goes into hiding. So she's always like kind of popping up. So
doesn't she fight Darth Maul at some point too?
Yes, because Darth Maul is a major character in both Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there a chance we see Darth Maul in this series? Because he did get teased in Han Solo, right?
No, actually, because there is an episode of Star Wars Rebels where he goes back to Tatooine, Maul does, and fights Kenobi. And I think Kenobi finally kills him.
Of course, it's on Tatooine.
Yeah, because Kenobi is supposed to be in hiding at that point.
But isn't Darth Maul like in that little like half bionic sort of spider thing?
He starts out with like the big spider body, but then he eventually gets a pair of like just robot legs.
Oh, okay. And then Obi-Wan kills him after that.
After that, but that's also after Maul leads a whole like gangster squad of guys and fights Darth Sidious and becomes briefly the leader of Mandalore. He takes over Mandalore, claims the Darksaber for himself.
Oh, I remember this actually. Yes. And that's how like the whole purge starts, right?
Yes. Yeah. It gets really like we're dealing with like, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like Marvel and DC comics, like how convoluted the timelines for those things are.
Well, see, this is the problem with Star Wars when they release things that aren't in chronological order, right?
Yeah.
So like right away we start with episode 4, 5, 6.
Yes.
And then we go 1, 2, 3, and then go to the future, and then back again, and then back to the future again. And it's just really, really convoluted, and certain things are retconned.
And you sound like a crazy person when you talk about it with anybody, even like people who know all this ephemera that we're talking about. You still sound like a crazy person because some of the plots are so crazy, and they're so divergent from the movies that most people are familiar with. You know, all these extra characters and all these extra events that happen. And that's why, you know, I can find myself spending a whole hour on Wookiepedia just not only trying to remember all the stuff that happened, but then getting caught up in all the little tangents that result.
But this is why it's also so incredibly successful, right? Because it's escapism at its finest. You can go as deep as you want.
Yes.
I think that's really why we keep coming back to Star Wars. And every time they introduce something new, which they have done in The Mandalorian, we keep wanting more and we keep wanting to find out more. So I'm actually looking forward to what happens the rest of the season. Although we do know that season 2 is probably going to end on a cliffhanger because season 3 is already in the works.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You can tell even from the way they're laying the groundwork with the Bo-Katan character in this one episode, the most recent, that there is the potential for this to stretch out for many seasons because the things that the characters are planning and what's probably going to like play out is a lot of like the Mandalorian just kind of going from one planet to the next, trying to connect the dots, and he'll keep getting waylaid by like new quests and new side missions.
The one final thought I had was, you know how he lands on the planet and he asks a Mon Calamari to fix his ship?
Yeah.
And then it's basically held together by duct tape at that point. I mean, he makes a point of saying how like, oh, this is how like the Mon Calamari do things, indicating that they're just kind of like whatever. Yeah,
I found that remark at the end of the episode a little bit confusing, actually, because from what I remember, the Mon Calamari are actually supposed to be pretty good shipbuilders. Like the ships that
and they're also supposed to be like intelligent, right?
Yeah, the ships that they fly in like Return of the Jedi, those big kind of like organic looking ones that are kind of oval shaped. They're like very clean in the inside. There's no like fishing nets holding stuff together. So I'm not really sure what the Mandalorian's comment at the end of that episode was. Maybe he was just being racist.
Yeah, I was just going to say, bottom line, the Mandalorian's racist.
Yeah, he actually doesn't know very much about Mon Calamari, and he's just making some assumptions based on the fishing nets.
It's kind of believable because he has such like a narrow world view of things.
Yeah.
This is the way. That's just what he knows. He's very inflexible. He's learning to be flexible because he has this child.
Yes.
And as we've seen in a lot of like media and stories, the child always helps the adult become like a child again. It's never really the adult raising the child to become an adult.
Yes.
A lot of times it's the other way around. So I thought that was really interesting.
Normally, you'd think there would be absolutely no connective tissue between the Mandalorian and the Crown, but talking about parents and children and how how those relationships can be quite complex, and you never quite can account for all of the influence that each has on the other. That's sort of what we're seeing play out in this fourth season of The Crown that just dropped on Netflix, because we're getting two very different generations of the royal family. It's centering a lot around Princess Diana. That's like the headline grabber of this season.
All I want is to be loved. It's all any of us want from you.
What does one have to do to get some kindness in this family?
In time, she will give up her fight and bend, as they all do.
And if she doesn't bend, what then? She will break.
So you've seen a few more episodes so far than I have. You've been binging it a bit more than I have. It only just dropped today, the day we're recording it, the 15th. But what do you think of the ones you've seen so far?
The Crown still remains, I think, one of the best talky dramas out there. Like it's really bereft of levity and excitement. But if you really want an examination of, you know, the difference between duty and love and the sacrifices people in power have to make, I think this is an excellent show for it. It just doesn't have a lot of murders. It doesn't have a lot of backstabbing, but it deals with real people and real issues. So I've always loved that. So far this season, I'm enjoying it. We have yet to get to the meat of the season, which is the conflict between Charles and Diana. So this season's supposed to cover their first meeting, all the way till when after William and Harry are born. And so throughout the first, I'd say 2 or 3 episodes, they're really sowing seeds of discontentment. This is very much a continuation of what we've seen in the previous seasons, where people who aren't meant to marry or live together end up marrying and living together.
Right.
And so I really wonder how that's all going to come to a head. And we know that in real life it does, because Diana dies in a car accident. But there are also other stories around it. So like the affairs, we know about Charles and Camilla. There's always like internet rumors about Harry's true father.
Yes.
Prince Andrew and Edward come into picture, and we're definitely going to be examining actually how they handle Prince Andrew, considering what's happened.
Yes.
Over the past 2 years with Jeffrey Epstein.
I've been curious about that because we haven't really seen Andrew on the show very much at all.
Exactly. And so a lot of the things are similar. It's a bit of a rehashing, slightly different perspectives because you have different characters. But I do think the person who ultimately steals the show so far this season has been Gillian Anderson as Margaret Thatcher. She is so good.
Yes. Yeah, you have to bring that up.
So there are movies where you cast someone and then you age them. But they don't act that age because their movements are almost too smooth or their voice is too crisp and clear. But Thatcher, I mean, you really feel like the age, the wisdom, the pressure she's in with just the way Gillian Anderson delivers her lines. Like both her and Emma Corrin, who plays Diana Spencer, I think really nail it.
Yes.
I think Emma Corrin looks less like Diana Spencer, but she's got like the head tilt. She's got the blue eyes, the doe-eyed look. So far that's just, the casting has been, I think, half the battle, and they knocked it out of the park. And obviously we have to mention Olivia Colman as the Queen, who is just as good as ever.
Well, and I was very entertained when they cast Gillian Anderson as Margaret Thatcher, because the initial reaction was everyone being like, oh, I've never felt more sexually confused in my life, because Gillian Anderson is a,
you know what?
Is a very beautiful woman.
I'm attracted to Margaret Thatcher now.
Yeah, and there you go. But here she is, like, you know, kind of hobbling along with a bit of a old crone kind of thing she's doing with her body language. She's got this raspy voice, this horrible, like the hairstyle that Margaret Thatcher is known for, makes her look sort of like an alien with this kind of bulbous kind of thing coming out the back of her head.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, the infamous policies that Thatcher's government adopted that led to unemployment and very, very poor public reception. So that's going to drive a lot of the political intrigue in this season, where you see the clash of styles between Thatcher and the Queen. And they're like, they set that up in the very first episode by Prince Philip sort of dismissively saying, oh, just what the country needs, you know, for 2 women to be in charge, in a classic Philip-like remark. But then the question is, like, there may be 2 women in charge, but they have vastly different approaches to public life.
I can't remember what episode it was. The part where they're trying to shoot the stag. Did you get to that one?
Yes, that's the second episode.
Right. So that was really interesting, how they actually delivered that theme with the stag sort of representing England and how he crosses the 2 estates, Thatcher and the Queen, and how differently they have to handle things and respect each other's boundaries, how exactly it's divided, and that they can't interfere with each other. Otherwise, it just becomes chaotic.
Yeah. And like Thatcher is, she's so prissy in a weird sort of way, because she doesn't want to, she's not an outdoors woman. She doesn't want to get her clothes or her shoes dirty. And she kind of goes against her will out to Balmoral. And she initially goes with the Queen looking for this stag, but then turns back because she's not properly equipped. She's not really interested in hunting. But then when Diana goes out on a weekend, she goes into it like totally wholeheartedly. She has all the right equipment. She, she's not afraid to get down and dirty, go out hunting with Philip, and is immediately warmly received into the royal family, even though Charles isn't super into her.
He's not into her at all, I don't think.
He shows like a passing interest when he's first introduced to her, but then...
Well, because she's pretty.
Yeah. But then eventually it becomes clear that, like, you know, he wants to be with Camilla Parker Bowles. And so that there are these contrasts happening. It's actually, that second episode is quite good. And with the deer standing in for England itself, and how different Diana and Margaret Thatcher are, and their reception by the royal family, and their ability or inability to actually chase the deer. You know, Peter Morgan, he's a good screenwriter.
I think if you want to see peak The Crown, episode 2 is one of those, because it just ties in so subtly all the themes and all the conflicts that they're trying to introduce.
Certainly this depiction of her, but the more kind of like the popular kind of idea of Margaret Thatcher is that she just wasn't a very fun person. And so
we got that for sure, right?
So then the idea is like, oh, well, even if some people would theorize that even if England was in the black and had lots of money to spend, she still wouldn't be interested in it because she was just such a nasty person.
Right.
And I always think about this. There's this clip that makes the rounds when people are talking about Margaret Thatcher. It's a news interview with a Scottish woman on the day that Thatcher died.
I put a stake through her heart and garlic around her neck to make sure she never come back.
That's a pretty horrible thing to say when her funeral's going on right now.
Too bad.
Well, because she had so many conflicts with all her neighboring countries.
Yes, she definitely looked down upon places like Ireland and Scotland as being like, you know, lesser than England. And of course we see that in episode 2, because they take her to the Highland Games near Balmoral, and she and her,
and she just can't, she doesn't understand it.
Yeah, she and her husband see these sports happening, like, you know, the caber toss and the throwing of the haggis and stuff like that, and they just are absolutely disgusted by the whole thing. And so
but they play it off as them wanting to do actual work in the city.
Yes.
Rather than being there. Like, it's not like they're looking down on them. It's more that they just are way more practical. They don't take time off. They just work. And that's what their lives are about.
And the royal family is seen as like wasting taxpayer money by taking these elaborate vacations and spending all this time at the castle. And
yeah, exactly. So sometimes I feel like the hate's kind of misdirected. Maybe not now, but I feel like, you know, there are a lot more worse members of the royal family that, you know, should be hated on more so than Thatcher, who I think was just a politician doing what she thought was right, obviously.
Of course.
Like it or not, but I mean, we can all agree that Prince Andrew's like a terrible human being, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is, there's a part of me that wishes I followed the royal family a bit more back in the day, so I can kind of like compare that version of events to the stuff that's happening in the show, because it does feel like Diana and Charles's relationship has been kind of Hollywood fictionalized, especially the first meeting. Have you seen that one yet? The first meeting between Charles and Diana, where she's walking across the foyer.
Oh yeah, that's the first episode. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So is that actually how it happened? Or is that kind of like fictionalized? Because there's a bit of like a stage play going on there where she's in costume, she's got the mask on, and she's hiding behind this plant, and he's trying to come around and look at her, but she's kind of hiding again. Yeah. And they have this little weird dialogue where it's kind of flirting. And I wonder if that's really like how they met, because it seems so implausible.
I've heard the story before, but I can't remember if it actually happened at the Spencer family home, the way we see it in the show, or if it happened somewhere else, because the suggestion is that she's dressed up in the costume because she's getting ready for a school production of Midsummer Night's Dream, and she's been cast as a tree. So she's done up in this kind of tree-like costume. The actual scene between her and Charles has a bit of like a Shakespeare play kind of a vibe to it, where they're kind of like star-crossed lovers who are meeting for the first time.
Which I found very out of place for a show that's all about decorum and delivering lines that are really not veiled in any way. Like if you listen to any of the politicians talk, if you listen to any of the royal family members talk, they're very clear about what they like and don't like, which is why like 90% of them come off as whiny, by the way. Because it's like, I get bullied. Oh, this isn't good enough. Oh, I have 5 different gardens, but none of them are good enough. Oh, I got a wife that won't talk to me. Well, maybe it's because you cheat on her all the time, Charles. By the way, Charles as a character, I mean, I've never wanted to punch someone more in the face. So I think they really pull that off, and the silhouette with his ears, his big ears, that is so very unique.
Yeah.
He belongs in Star Wars with that kind of silhouette, because I can tell immediately who it is.
From what I understand, like this season is going to end when Margaret Thatcher is still around. So it's not going to take us up through the end of Diana's life or the kind of time when Prince Andrew was first getting to know Jeffrey Epstein and stuff like that. So it's not going to dig into that until season 5 or season 6. And they're going to actually have Elizabeth Debicki take over as Diana in season 5. So
they already announced that, right?
Yeah. So they
what an interesting choice for Diana.
Again, like a resemblance, you can sort of see it. Definitely different though, because Elizabeth Debicki does different things than what you'd think of as Diana usually.
Well, because like Debicki's really good at playing 2 different characters. One, the damsel in distress, which we know Diana kind of is, and then also like the ice cold bitch like she does in Man from U.N.C.L.E. and you do get that sense from Diana later on. It's going to be really interesting because Elizabeth Debicki gives us such a different vibe than Diana. Emma Corrin, she looks a little different. I don't think the feel is quite the same, but she's got the mannerisms down pat.
Yeah.
So I credit to Emma Corrin. Okay, well, I think that does it for this episode of the show.
This episode dealt with mostly TV and like an older movie, Queen and Slim, as well as Ronin off the top. But it looks like there's going to be some new movies coming out in the next couple of weeks that you can look forward to us talking about. There's the Steve McQueen series coming to Amazon Prime, Small Axe, which is a series of feature-length movies. I think there are 5 feature-length movies that he's directed, all set in about the West Indian community in London. So we'll probably try to get into that in the episodes to come. There's a Mel Gibson Christmas movie that I kind of want to see, even though it's probably going to be bad. It's called Fat Man. It's sort of a dark comedy. So that we might save that for a Christmas-themed episode, but definitely planning to check that out.
I should add, though, that I did watch Primal with Nick Cage on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard about this movie?
I have heard of it.
It is terrible. It is not even so bad it's good. It's just bad.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Yeah, and like the CGI is bad. Nick Cage doesn't freak out at any point in the movie.
No Cage freakouts? I mean, that's when you know that it's not worth your time.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of yells at someone for a little bit, but there's no like, the bees,
yeah,
kind of freak out. So that was kind of disappointing, but you can only win so many times when you just click on a random movie on the streaming service.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll find something to talk about. We'll definitely talk about the movies that you just mentioned there. But coming to you from Vancouver, my name is Jason Chen.
And coming to you from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.